Welcome to another Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my wonderful co host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm having the greatest day I've ever had in the history of the world.
Terrifying. Such joy is inaccessible to the average man, but to us Christians, it may flow into us like water eternally.
It's our
I
daily life.
It's true. It's true. I actually had saw some weird Twitter threads around Dungeon Meshi, which is the one anime that I'm watching, and it's like everyone's like, "Yeah, Laos is autistic. He's not happy all the time." It's like, what do you mean? That's not a being unhappy isn't a sign of being autistic or anything. It's just a sign that he's a dour man. He's not like his default state isn't happy, and you're calling him autistic. It's like you're weird. You're all weird. But
Yeah, I can't really judge since I am a dour man, which, by the way, is not contradictory with being a joyful man.
it's true.
Uh, I am a dour man, but also probably autistic. Uh,
No, no.
so I can't really judge.
Uh, I am forever filled with the spirit of my Puritan ancestors. Uh, and by that I mean Solomon Kane never did anything wrong. But speaking of my Puritan ancestors, who no, I didn't really have Puritan ancestors, sadly. Though I did have ancestors who were Puritan, just not the ones you're thinking of. Uh,
Ooh,
the
drama.
I know. I wish I was of that heady stock of Solomon Kane. Speaking of colonization and religion, uh, the Puritans and so on, the Puritans were unique in that they were a religious refugee group that left to the new lands to find and create for themselves a city on a hill, a colony that provided them the religious freedom they needed to be Puritan. What's more, Hernan Cortez, when he went to the New World, and I'm sure Columbus did too, even though I've never really heard anything about Columbus's priest, uh, surely he brought to the New World a Catholic priest
Oh
to
yeah, that came
provide,
on.
yeah,
Hmm.
to provide what necessary rights and weal that the Catholics require in their day to day life. We look at science fiction and we look at the world outside of us, and we do see a constant need, even as we travel, for priests and religious figures to help us, to provide us spiritual guidance, and the many other duties that a priest or pastor must need perform. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I have seen some absolutely brain dead takes on Dune that clearly show that no one really understands one of the core themes of the series, which is about how religion is used in the control of power and politics. Uh, there are quite a few different religious factions within Dune. You have the Orange Catholic Bible. You also have, which isn't really an influence compared to everything else, it's the religion for the common man, which, as may be noted, is not very important to the schemes of their elites. Then you have things like the Bene Gesserit, which is a religious order of nuns. You have the Spacers Guild, which is also a religious order of a kind. Think of them as drug addicted space monks. Hello, Bradford. You also have the Fremen with their own religion, which has its savior in Paul Atreides or Muad'Dib. Um, and one must assume that the Harkonnens must have some justification for their many excesses. I believe the Harkonnens have a bit more of the religion about them than before, but it is, of course, purely satanic. Uh, it's one of those things where you would have these, leaders, privateer leaders of Italian city states, and they would go to mass and religious celebrations and so on and so forth, and then return to their murdering and their whoring. one might imagine that there is not really that much of a difference between their mindset and the mindset of the nobility in Dune. Uh, it's interesting. It's fascinating. I did wish I knew more about the intricacies of certain parts of the religious aspects of Dune, but it is not focused on. Partially because science fiction does not lend itself very well to religious inspection. And this is probably by
Yep.
design. Mostly because when you try to create your own religion, it has to be both uh, uh, naturalistic to the environment that it is grown in, and it has to have a greater purpose for the beyond. The problem is that most atheist writers had no ability to think of the beyond in a way that is satisfying to the common man. Uh, they are atheists themselves. It is literally not in their imagination to comprehend what it is. I've not even come across any successful imitations of Buddhism, which quite frankly is the easiest of them to figure out. Or at best you might see simple reincarnation, which is brain dead and simple.
So Buddhism is an interesting one. As a philosophical system of the major world religions, in my opinion, it is probably the second most robust to the Christian system,
Yep.
unless you count unless you count the Jewish system. But yeah, I don't know. Uh, the Christian system is just the fulfillment of the Jewish system. So yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's interesting. You mentioned that's the easiest to do, but there is a sense in like there's a lot of subtleties to Buddhist belief.
Yeah.
I've seen it mentioned before. Somebody mentioned like one of the problems with Buddhism is that you'll Buddhism is the only philosophical world system, right, that
Mm.
was used by a people outside of Christianity to abolish slavery,
Yeah.
right? There were Buddhist kingdoms or Buddhist, governments that actually worked out the logic and became morally strong enough to apply that logic. The only other groups that managed that were Christian based philosophies, right?
Yes.
Uh, so the problem is that in Buddhism, there's basically two options. Either you are going to be the Buddha, meaning that you're going to be enlightened, or there's no real point.
Yeah.
So it becomes this problem where you have people with incredibly strong wills who are Buddhists. This is where you get the images of the people who immolate themselves live,
Yes.
right? And then the vast majority of people who figure that they'll be reincarnated anyway.
Yep.
You know, uh, and Buddhism is just kind of like it is what it is,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the genius of the philosophy, and I mean that entirely non sarcastically, right? It
Yeah.
is what it is the genius of the philosophy, because there is a sense in which that is right,
Yeah.
right? But
I mean the Bible talks about it. It is what it is. Is sometimes the answer. We have to toil for our daily bread. Uh, God may care for us, but that doesn't mean we just sort of sit there with, holy grapes being rained on us. Are you there?
wait, repeat that. I'm confused by what you're saying.
As like God provides for us, but it's not like He rains manna down from heaven at
Oh,
this time.
I see.
He has in the past, but He doesn't now, or at least He has not in a direct manner for me for my own empty pantry. Um, but there's also a supermarket down the way. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Like, if you're going to include, I guess what I'm saying is, if you're going to include Buddhism as your philosophy in science fiction, I agree with you in that I think you can,
Yes.
right? Like, there, there is a way if you were to write out a Buddhist system. The only one that I know that tried it, sort of, but not really, is Firefly. Uh,
Really?
yeah, there's definitely Buddhist influences in Firefly. Uh, Shepherd Book in the story is an explicitly Christian pastor, but shepherd is not a very common title for a pastor. I think it does exist in the real world,
Well,
but
pastor
it's
is
just
shepherd.
right. I know,
Okay.
but I mean, like I've never heard. So what I'm saying is what this implies is some evolution of the religion, even at the
Hmm.
time of Firefly.
I gotcha.
Like it, so because they're using the title that's not commonly in use today, and nobody seems to be surprised that he calls himself shepherd. Like
Hmm.
nobody goes, "Wow, you call." I normally people say pastor. No, they go, "Oh, he's a shepherd."
Yeah.
You know, uh, so that implies some evolution of the religion, and people have criticized this sometimes. Of like, Book isn't really a good example of a Christian pastor. I've heard people point to other, I forget which ones, but point to other sci-fi series as better examples of this trope. But while this is sort of true, I think it kind of misses that the world of Firefly is meant to be the result of like a Chinese American sort of culture dominance that where both sides sort of dominated the world, and Buddhism probably got into Book's philosophy
Hmm.
in some way, right? Like that
Right.
Christian philosophy was probably heavily influenced by Buddhism. Now, China, I believe, has a very strong Buddhist influence. Like the religions of China, there are some folk religions, sort of like Japanese Shintoism. Uh, to be clear, not Japanese Shintoism. That's something else. But a similar type of religion in that it's not really it's one religion, which is true of Hinduism as
Hmm.
well, right? Hinduism isn't a religion properly speaking. Hinduism is a group of many different cults across the Indian subcontinent that have enough overlap that for ease of talking about it, we group them together. Uh, and arguably, we shouldn't do that, by the way, uh, because there are vast differences between them. Like, for example, I have made fun of the fact that Vivek Ramaswamy, is that his last name?
Yep.
Uh, yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy is Hindu, and I have sometimes made jokes at his expense on this point, not making fun of the fact that he's Hindu, but making fun of the fact that he will sort of acknowledge it, but not really acknowledge it, like he's almost ashamed of it. However, in all fairness to Vivek, uh, he is of a variety of Hindu that's very different from some of the nastier varieties of Hindu, right?
Right.
Like the Hindu that he is a part of, for example, is very explicitly opposed to the caste system. Uh, this is in his history. Like you can see that he's backed people in the past who were very opposed, and it's part of his religious system that they are not the variety of Hindu that is in support of the caste system, right?
Hmm.
And the reason that this is possible is that Hinduism isn't a religion. It's a group of religions that happen to be located in India, and there is overlap, particularly with gods. Honestly, if anything, it's just really a type of paganism in the sense of like the Romans. What was the Roman religion? Well, anybody can name the 12, the Roman pantheon of the 12 main gods, right? Uh, if you've studied, you've read in school, you could probably rattle it off, right?
Hmm.
But that's kind of misleading to say that's the Roman religion because the Romans, in a sense, like they didn't really have a religion in the way that Christians have a religion or Jews even have a religion. They were quite happy to accept that the gods of people they conquered existed. It's just that they lost to their gods. And if the people wanted to continue worshiping those gods that, they lost to, sure, go ahead. Maybe they're even impressed by the fighting prowess and they'll add them to their cult, like this happened with Mithra, right?
Yep.
For that matter, this happened with the Greeks. That's why the Roman gods are the Greek gods.
Yeah.
So, this is the sort of thing that we see going on in India, where Hinduism isn't really one religion, but some of the gods have overlap because the way that their system works is that, well, you could be part of a completely different religious tradition and still share some of the same gods. Like,
Hmm.
that doesn't really matter.
Yes. But when it comes down to science fiction, especially, these are not people who like the whatever the provincials are. You know the I'm trying to think of how to say this. Like the religion of the elites is fundamentally like how they act and how they're given license to act is always different than with the common man, especially in places in things like Dune, where uh, the Harkonnens live their excessive, wicked lives, and nobody seems to bother to censure them. Sure, they had Arrakis, the spice planet, under their thumb for a while, but like the second they lost that power, all of a sudden, people didn't go the disgusting fat, you know, like there's no evil under the sun that Baron Harkonnen doesn't do. All right, it just doesn't exist. It does like they try to poison him with a child slave, that he was molesting. Like it's there's everyone understands that these people are evil, despicable people, and it's not like it's like they had an army like the Atreides or the Sardaukar or the Fremen. In fact, it's pretty clear that they could have in no ways defeated the Atreides or even held on to Arrakis without a great deal of support from the Emperor. So it's like there's a moral question that's never really answered, and that is, of course, everyone hates the Harkonnens. Why do they still exist? Why don't their people revolt? Why don't this happen? Why don't that? Well, the people don't revolt because they use like slave worms or something. They enslave them mentally. But you get what I'm saying, right? If there was an actual religion in Dune with a moral center that could provide casus belli for, to remove enemies, uh, you know, I believe that it would have been done. Especially when they're attacking the Atreides, there's no question of morality about it. It is just the question of power. But they still have these uh, points where there's religious devotion to the savior idea that comes in with Paul. There's religious devotion to uh, the Kwisatz Haderach that was also Paul. You get what I'm saying? Like there's still religious devotion to things, but not necessarily in any redemptive or soulful sense. That we're not. I'm not even sure what a lot of these goals and plans were to achieve, because it seems like whenever they showed up, uh, the people who tried to run them destroyed them. Uh, so yeah, no, it's just strange to me, but at the same time, it's like it's there, and it's the Dune stuff does more with it and better than I've seen in other science fiction. Quite frankly, I'm of the opinion that space travel and space colonization, like I said before, can only be done by the religiously motivated, by those who are religiously devoted to, a certain sort of stability. Not necessarily the stability that people think of in like a frozen society, but in the sense of, uh, like I said, with the less than faster than light ships, they will flare their lasers so that your sailing ships can come into port without issue, if you get me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
John C. Wright's books, the Count of the Trillion series, uh, does have that in the cold equations, where essentially, um, where essentially there's a thing called the cold equations, which is more or less a rules-based religious devotion that uh, that they have to follow through. But of course, they're gigantic million IQ AIs. Therefore, they can't just be told, you must do this. Well, they can think their way out of anything. They can think their way out of any morality. So they have to have, hey, these are the exact punishments and price ranges and energy expenditures that must be met and the debts that are incurred therein, which I think
Yeah,
functions very well.
there's a problem with creating religions in fictional work, and quite frankly, there are very few that have come across to me as feeling in any way real. Uh, this is especially a problem, and I'm sure you know this, in Japanese works, right? That's like one of the great blind spots of Japanese media, as much as I enjoy it, is generally religion, right? Not always. There are outstanding
Yep.
exceptions to the rule, like Trigun, but generally. And you see this in things like, oh, I had something in mind. Spice and Wolf. Have you ever seen Spice and Wolf?
I've seen some of it.
I haven't seen a lot of it because I heard it actually, like, supposedly what it is known for is that it is extremely accurate in its economics, right? Like that the economics of
That's
Spice
accurate.
and Wolf. What was that? What was that? Oh no, Ben.
That's accurate.
Okay, I didn't hear what you said. All right, yeah. Like supposedly it's very accurate about its economics, but the big blind spot of the series is its religion. Shield Hero is really bad about this. So a lot of Japanese media will just say like, well, if you create a religion that's like a real religion, then it's going to be more believable that something like it exists. And don't get me wrong, I actually think that is a reasonable way to design a fictional religion, right? Like I appreciate the idea. The problem is that because Japanese people really do not understand religion, they get some aspects of it like wildly wrong. Uh, and I don't mean wrong in doctrine because you can make up the doctrine. I mean wrong in like how people react to it. Shield Hero is a really outstanding example of this, right? Where the queen, in a famously terrible scene, at least it's famous among our us since we've talked about it before, and it's also a really funny scene, but unintentionally. Uh, Famously in the Rising of the Shield Hero, the titular character, the Shield Hero, in the religion of the Empire, is presented as like a devil figure, right? And there is like a meeting where the queen, who is like the head of the church, which there is some precedent for that, we see it in Anglicanism, uh, decides to change the religion on the spot. The Shield Hero is no longer the devil. They were wrong. I want you to keep in mind there are like prophecies, right, about the Shield Hero.
Yep.
Like going back for that, like the entire kingdom knows the Shield Hero is like a devil figure. Is somebody you can't trust, right? This is something that the church has been pushing it for maybe centuries, maybe even longer, right? Like this is in their lore. Well, the queen just changes it on the spot, and everyone is just okay with that. In fact, they're all cheering. Like I don't really know how to explain how bad this is. And if you're not religious, you wouldn't get it. And if you are, you're probably like, wow, that sounds awful. Right? Like, it would be as if the Pope made an announcement tomorrow and said, all right, here is a new ex cathedra statement. It's not just going to be like a controversial doctrine. That's one thing. No, what we're going to say is remember Satan, we were wrong. He's actually pretty good. Uh,
He told me so himself.
Yeah, I talked to him. I had a meeting. It's now ex cathedra, right? I'm declaring it as the Pope. It is part of the religion. All churches are hereby required to put up statues to Satan. Apologize to him. He is God's number two. That is like the equivalent of what happened in the Shield Hero. and then everybody just accepting it and going, yeah, no, that tracks. Uh,
Yep.
like these are the sorts of mistakes you see with people who just don't get religion. There's a more subtle version in a show that I actually kind of like. I don't love it, but I think it has its moments. You remember Ascendance of a Bookworm by any chance?
I don't remember it.
Yeah, it was big a few years ago. I haven't even seen it in a while, but I remember like I watched at least one season of it and
Oh
a
yeah,
bit of
yeah. It's
season
about the
two.
girl who could read, which is such a fantasy.
Yeah. Yes. Uh no, it was a fine series, right? Like it was good. Uh I liked aspect, or maybe more accurately would be to say that there were aspects of it I definitely liked, and I got invested enough in it to follow it for a while,
Mm.
right? Uh, so in Ascendance of a Bookworm, they also have an evil church, and the problems with Ascendance of a Bookworm are not as obvious as the problems with Shield Hero, which are just absurd. Uh, right, like the problems with Shield Hero are just absolutely ludicrous.
Yes.
Uh, and very, if you know anything
Unsurmountable.
about, yeah, if you know anything about religion, very obviously so. Like, immediately, anybody who spent time growing up in a religion should look at that and be like, what? What's going on? So,
Mm-hmm.
I would say a sentence of a bookworm is less obvious, but there are still problems,
Mm.
right? Like, so the problems that I see, uh, in a sentence in a bookworm is that everybody gets baptized in this church, which is, we'll call it the not Catholic church, which is every medieval ish church, right? It's
Right.
not the Catholic church, but it is the Catholic church, right?
Right.
So the not Catholic church, you learn that if you are an orphan, then the not Catholic church will take you in, right?
Right.
Which makes sense. That's not a problem. That is a perfectly valid thing. That is something that is a role that the church has fulfilled in history, right?
Mm.
Totally fine. Uh, the problem comes in with you learn that everybody there is like, so the main character, Mine is her name. She has this overflow of magic that's going to kill her, and the people who can help her are with the church. But her parents absolutely positively do not want her to work with the church. Right? Like they don't want her to do
Sure.
it. They will do anything. They would literally rather her die. Right?
Okay.
And they don't say why. It's just implied. And Mine is frustrated by this because the church also has books. Well, you learn Mine gets in and is lucky to have like a layer of protection. Like there's one of the moral people in the church kind of watches out for her. Uh, and you learn that they sexually abuse the orphans. Now, this again, I want to emphasize, like, oh, that's what do you mean that's unrealistic? No, it's not unrealistic that churchmen sexually abuse children. Obviously, it's not. I'm not saying that, right? Like,
Mm.
I'm not that blind to my church, the sins of the people of my church, right? What I am saying is that if it is done institutionally and known by everybody in the town that nobody would do anything about it is absurd. And I really want to emphasize here the specifics of what I'm saying, right? Like, really think about this. It is known so much that, like, the parents know it, and they're still getting her baptized in the church, right? Like, they're still bringing her to the church and baptizing her, but they know, basically for a fact, to the point where they would rather her die than go there, right? That you will be sexually abused if you are a child and working with the church. You are going to become a sex slave, right? Like the church is basically just a sex slave institution in the world of Ascendance of a Bookworm. That is very different from there are priests who abuse children, right?
Yep.
That is a completely different thing. You've now basically institutionalized it. And that's where it becomes absurd to me that people know about this and they just accept it. Yeah. Like, yeah, they abuse
Yep.
children. We're going to get you baptized there anyway. We're still going to go to mass or the equivalent of, right?
Yep.
Just avoid the sex slaves. Like, no, that is absolutely ludicrous. Like, again, there is a huge difference between there are priests who do it and try and hide it, and even if it's an open secret that, oh, we know some priests, if you knew your like, think of it in another way. If you knew that your parish priest was doing it, right, like your
Right.
local, or pastor if you're Protestant, right, you knew for a fact, would you
Mm-hmm.
just go to mass,
No,
get them baptized, act like nothing was wrong? Of course not.
not when
Right, that
it's
would be
that
absurd.
obvious.
Yeah, that would be completely absurd. And we know it's that obvious because her parents are literally, she's like, I'm going to die. They're offering a way for me to not die. And her parents are like, absolutely not. So they know, right?
Yeah.
Like, clearly it's that obvious. That's where you get problems with like Japanese portrayals of religion because that's a little bit more subtle, I will admit, than Rising of the Shield Hero,
Right.
right?
But it's like even during some of the worst sex scandals that I can think of, they, Catholic families were still sending their kids to be, choir boys and such like. But it was also like, how do I want to put it? Like there still had to be a substantial amount of secrecy that had to be maintained by the wicked priests. Uh,
Yes.
Otherwise, quite frankly, violence would be done upon them. Uh, there's some very harsh words that I read from some old reformer of the church from early medieval times, where basically he says they'll be beaten until they're barely alive, and then they'll be put away so that they never see a child again. You know, it's there's
Yeah,
there's
I think that might. I think I actually know who you might be referring. That might be St. Peter in Alaska.
I think so. Uh, but point is,
He was based.
yeah, that's pretty based. But point is that there are things that are in the system that prevent corruption of that nature. And if people are doing their jobs, uh, this will be prevented. Now we went through a cluster where communists and other groups infiltrated the Catholic Church, and communists are never Christian. And they certainly have no problems destroying those who they hate. So
Mm-hmm.
it is to me absolutely no surprise that there is the problem that we see today. And in fact, it has done immense damage to the church and to the work of Christianity and to the work of even the Protestants and probably the Orthodox if they do any work. Uh, the it's one of those things where if somebody said to me, "Well, I don't want to become Christian," because of the evil of these Catholic priests who were mostly not punished for their actions and instead either moved away or even promoted in some cases, uh, I would have to say, okay, listen, I understand that, but they're not Christian. They just say they are to take advantage of people. It is a sign of the depravity of the world and of the sin nature, and they need Christ more than anyone else. And they
By
would
the way, St. Peter Damien, not in Alaska. In Alaska is a different.
have too many Peters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Too many Peters. There's like
But
too
you're
many Peters
absolute.
in a
Yeah,
single house.
you're completely correct.
Right, and
And
it creates. Sorry, I just wanted to continue on to the next
sure.
point, and it creates a strong disorder where, for example, I knew a guy whose father, no, sorry, his uncle, reported a pedophile priest. He experienced a lot of problems, but also he experienced a lot of problems from his local area because the priest denied everything until an investigation proved that yeah, he was diddling kids. So there's ways to get around that, but if the universal thought is every priest is evil, that doesn't create a sustainable structure that religion can function on. You cannot have every priest except for like one be evil. You have to have the majority of the priests be good. Um, the exception is in matters of heresy, but that's assuming that the heretics are devoted in their otherwise devoted in their services. Because if it's just falling down into debauchery, well, what happens? You either have reform or it becomes nothing and nobody cares anymore. So you had that in some places like in Italy, where everyone was running around doing whatever they want. The guy who's painting multiple Virgin Marys has 47 mistresses. Like and he died while in the embrace of the 36th one. Yeah, we know the numbers, Raphael. Uh, you start to have problems. But then you have reformers, especially a would-be reformer like Martin Luther, who sees this, goes, "This is disgusting. This cannot be why we're Christian," and pursues reformation. Uh, it doesn't matter that the Pope may be a good Pope or a bad Pope. When you look around and you see all the works of the people under them, you start to have differing opinions, which creates civil war, tendencies within a society. A lot of the founding fathers came from times and from families who had religious persecution that were the ripple effect from the Reformation. That's why they have freedom of religion. They never anticipated that we would be fighting Muslims on American soil. I think that's ridiculous. I'm very much a person who agrees with Fox Day that you can actually tell who the posterity is. It, of course, benefits me because I'm part of that. But you see what I'm saying? That like as these differences and corruptions work into a society, instability forms. Instead of uniting against the Saracens more strongly, there's just sort of oh, we beat them back, it's fine. We can go back to partying again, or we can go back to trading, or we can go back to the life we're living. You know, the exception, of course, is in colonization, because that in itself is a battle that's worthy of the soul, especially of the soul of our ancestors. The the ability to reach out to the stars is no different than is only different in form but not function from sorry, isn't different in form, but it is different in function because sail ships versus spaceships. Uh, than what Columbus and what the Puritans did and what other people did. Expanding out, to the point where if you don't prepare right, you will starve to death and be wrecked on a giant sea of Sargasso or in a calm belt or in who knows what. There be monsters. Requires a certain confidence in the repose of your own soul that you cannot do without religion. I do not believe that without religion, people would be able to do that. Um, I think it creates this fear in their mind. Either they must believe in self annihilation or reincarnation, or they must believe in heaven or hell. Well, heaven in this case. Um, from what I've read in certain cases, in certain regards, these men who believed in Christ often called upon Christ in their adventures. They had a hope in Christ Jesus that he would see them through, or else, they'll be just brought into heaven. And I believe that has to be the same case with science fiction. You cannot have a science fiction where nothing matters, and if you die, you die, and that's it, buddy. Because it'll create small minded people. The people who went out into the moon and other places were not nearly as atheistic as might be expected. Um, Werner von Braun has Psalm 17:1 on his tombstone. I believe it's the Lord knows the firmament and all that dwell therein. Uh, There's a necessity in the belief of the spiritual that is beyond the body, that cannot be faked. I believe that is a problem of Dune. Many of these people, especially of the Atreides and their elite cadre, and of the Harkonnens as well, but less so because degenerate souls believe they are quasi-immortal. Um, where they essentially go out and they don't have circumspection. Now that's part of the character flaw of the Atreides, that they have bravura, that they are brave, that they are confident, that they are the dashing captain. And indeed, that serves them very well. In fact, the only reason that they had failed was because of the Sardaukar, because the Emperor was willing to be this open, which they did not expect, at least in the level of that it was put forward. So you have a bunch of different ideas uh, that are incompatible. You have these religious orders that don't seem to have a god, but they have a savior. You have these men who care very much for goodness and honor and courage, but they don't have religious backing for it. You have uh, uh, excuse me. I'm trying to think of it. You have, belief in a savior with the Fremen, and even mechanics of honor and sin, quote unquote, like drinking water from the wells and such like. But there's very little um, uh, circumspection or morality. They are Muslim. Their morality is at the edge of a sword. There's there's the Orange Catholic Bible, but the only time it's referenced is really in regard to things like the Butlerian Jihad and maybe the Kwisatz Haderach, depending on how the Bene Gesserit are. Um, it's you need religious organs for the body to function, but to throw them out in the way that most science fiction writers do um, is not right. Is not functional. Other things like looking through some stories, there are some exceptions, of course. The Nightlands do have a lack of religion that works very well, but but they do have a religion, a set of beliefs. That is to say that they will be reincarnated to be with their loved ones over and over again until the end of the world, when they will be judged by the last human being, and then that's it. But also, they're not free humans. They are not free. They are trapped inside the last redoubt. They are souled beings surrounded by soul eating sharks. And that does not breed an ability to hope for better times. Their defeat is inevitable, it is prophesied. They have a timer, they know how many millions of years they have left. And they're not going to fall into despair and kill themselves. They are going to live and love as best they can until the final call. And they are going to wrest what victories they can from the horrid creatures of the outside, the pneumivores, the laughing things, the watching things, the abhumans, the cyclopses, the night hounds, and the silent things, silent watchers. And of course, there's that house where no one returns from. But you see how that creates a soulful attitude. One must be circumspect in their walk, as a Christian must be circumspect in his walk. If they are not, they will be devoured and slain, and their souls will be winked out, and they will never be reunited with their loved ones again. Dangerous stuff. But then again, like I said, that is itself a religious practice. It's self-fulfilling. It has a quasi-savior character. It has an end. It has a totality. And it was written by a Christian. And it was expanded by Christians. And even the atheists who wrote of it made it very Christian. In fact, I can tell the difference between the Christianity and non-Christianity of the fan fiction writers, some of whom have been of very high quality, like James Dobson, who, hold on, did I get the name right? I don't think I got the name right. The guy who wrote The High House, which I also believe. I believe he was Christian. I can't remember anymore. But essentially, uh, based on how they take it and how they treat it, you have sort of monks who look out upon the Nightlands and pull in information and do their best with it to know their enemies and perhaps maybe someday finding a way to defeat them. And you have the Earth current at the bottom where bodies may be reinterred and maybe even brought back to life, though that happens but once. Uh, but you compare that to Star Wars. There's the Force, but no one really interacts with the Force. Most people are functional atheists. You have Galaxy's Edge, where it's not really brought up, but there's a state religion that nobody really believes, but everyone kind of accepts. Um, you know, Let me see here. I'm looking through my library. There's Edgar Rice Burroughs, where they do have a religion of evil, but what they also have is the evil of their religion is kept away behind bars where no one can see it. The only time you see the evil of their religion is when you take your death boat down the stream and discover the cannibals that act as Pope. The white Martians they might scheme or whatever, no different than a Jesuit, but they are themselves, not the people eating the green and red Martians. Uh, and they are not like the black Martians who eat the white Martians. uh, I love that bit. There's a cannibal hierarchy on Barsoom, and no one talks about it. Um the black
That's pretty
Martian.
neat.
Yeah, I know. It's the way it goes is that the lowest tier is the red and the green Martians, and then the white Martians are the priest class, and then the black Martians are um, the ones above the white Martians. There's yellow Martians, but they kind of just live on the poles. Uh, but yeah, no, like that's actually a pretty self-sufficient religion. You have people who never actually see the evils of their religion, but at the same time, it provides them enough license to live their lives of violence and conquest and nomadism, while at the same time not interfering enough to, uh, sort of be realistic about it, like interference and non-interference. So but they have a pure warlike state that everyone kind of agrees is pretty rad actually. So it's hard to kind of say how stable their society would be if it was in multiple stars. I don't think it would be very stable. Hmm.
I wish I had something to add, but again, I haven't really read Dune.
Yeah, but it's
Uh,
just in general like what's a not a like in your estimation what's a sci-fi religion that you think works that's not just Christianity with a different coat of paint?
Sci-fi religion that works. That's not just Christianity with a coat of paint. Honestly, I really can't think of any. Uh, like so, Foundation has something that is kind of interesting. It's a weirdly positive view of religion from the viewpoint of atheists. The way that Asimov views religion in the Foundation series is essentially as one of the many forces that act upon the world and can thus be manipulated to get the outcomes that he wants. Right? Uh so they create a religion in order to facilitate the outcome that he wants to create. Right? And this religion ends up being a force for good as Asimov sees it. Right? Like I Don't even remember
Mm-hmm.
exactly what it was or if they called it anything, but would I call this a good portrayal of a religion? Well, no, because I don't think religion is fraud. I don't think that people would be that gullible, frankly. Uh, People wouldn't be that gullible at all. Uh, like not on the scale that Asimov needs them to be, right? Like there will always
Right.
be some people who are that gullible, but
There's
not
a
on the scale that Asimov needs.
there was a commentator about what is it, about the monophysite versus uh, duophysite, arguments way back in the
Yeah.
day, where essentially uh, he said you couldn't buy bread without somebody giving you their opinion on without somebody giving you an opinion on the religious arguments.
Yeah, basically what that's getting at is that people know more about what's going on than you might think.
Yes.
Uh but even besides that, it's like people will go, "What are you talking about? There aren't people wouldn't believe that's that." People believe all sorts of crazy things. Right, but an out and out con man doing, the equivalent
Mm-hmm.
of illusion magic. You're using advanced technology to do it, but the advanced technology is facilitating illusion magic, right?
Yes.
Like so somebody doing illusion magic on a large scale, would that be enough to cause some people to believe in him? Yeah, sure. I can imagine a cult forming around someone like that, right?
Has
You see
happened
it
in
all the time.
in real life. Yeah.
Would it be on the scale that Asimov needed it for it to work, which is like, massive chunks of the population and it's accepted as a legitimate religion very quickly? No,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
Right? The closest analog I could think of is Mormonism, and Mormonism doesn't really work. It
Right.
doesn't really work for a few reasons.
It doesn't hold up to
First,
scrutiny.
that's not even it. Is when I mean it doesn't hold up like as a parallel to Mormonism properly. So first, one of the problems with Mormonism is that people didn't accept it immediately. It was a cult initially, right? You could argue it's a cult today. I don't really care. That's
It's
not
a
my
cult.
point. I
Yeah.
mean, initially, like however you define cult, it was a cult in when it started, right? With all sorts of weird things going on, polygamy, whatever, right? Some nasty
Yeah.
stuff too that Joseph Smith was doing. Uh, so when Mormonism started, it did not convince a massive chunk of the population. It convinced a very small chunk of the population,
Mm-hmm.
right, to follow this guy. Now, nowadays, Mormonism is a lot bigger and it's growing very quickly. This is undeniable. I am happy to admit this to Mormons who are listening. Yeah, you're right. Mormonism's growing very fast.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, right? Like there's no doubt about that. However, very fast is all relative here, right?
Right.
It's not people didn't just see Joseph Smith doing, whatever he did to convince people of his claims and then immediately drop everything and go like, "Wow, he's definitely a prophet." No, he was shot in a gun battle. People did not accept it. It took a
Yep.
long time, right? Now, a short time historically speaking, I will grant, right? But a long time in terms of the scene in Foundation is like he's basically doing the equivalent of televising it to large groups of people, right?
Yes.
If you recall it, I don't recall it that well. I only have vague details. And the scene itself isn't bad, by the way. It's actually entertaining. Like I remember being very entertained by the chutzpah of the scene, if you want to put it that way, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but is it realistic? I would argue no, right?
Right.
That's why when you go like, is there a good example of a sci-fi religion that isn't Christianity? I can't really think of any, except like you said, sort of, kind of, but not really. Awake in the Nightland. Except Awake in the Nightland isn't a religion; it is very explicitly a science, right?
Yes.
Uh,
Oh well, I
John
would.
C. Wright.
If
John C. Wright wrote an entire essay arguing this point that Awake in the Nightland should be understood as science fiction, not fantasy. Uh,
yes.
and I agree with him entirely. It is presented in a scientific way. It is looked at as a scientific idea. It is absolutely Christian in philosophy, but it is not Christian as a religion. Uh,
Right. Now,
like
I
they
would
don't
I
have.
would make the argument that, in fact, religion, theology especially, is a science. Uh, but
I'm not making I'm making the modern distinctions.
sure.
Uh, right, theology as queen of the sciences. Yes, I am talking about. If you want to get Aristotelian, I'm talking specifically about physics.
Sure.
Uh, I think that yeah, physics. You could also call it natural theology,
Yeah.
perhaps, something like that. But I'm using the modern distinctions. But yes, I would agree with you. Theology is science, if properly so speaking. Uh, yeah, as Aristotle would say, but and Aquinas. But yes, like yeah, there just isn't a lot. As I'm trying to
Right.
cycle through other sci-fi books in my head. A Canticle for Leibowitz is one of I've talked about it many times. One of the great masterpieces, but it's just Catholic.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even fictional fake Catholic. It's literally Catholic. Uh, and it's an amazing book, highly recommended. But like, yeah, the religion works because it's a real religion. Uh, that would do it. Um, I don't know. I have heard, though I'm not sure of this, 'cause I haven't read any of them. Perhaps unfortunately, maybe I should. That Larry Correa's Monster Hunter series actually uses a Mormon cosmology to very interesting effect. Uh, and you know what? I could absolutely buy Mormonism as the basis of of a fictional cosmology. Like they have worked it out in some detail, and to the extent where it's being believed by a lot of people. So certainly, I think that in a work of fiction, saying, "Hey, Mormonism's true. Here are the implications," I think could be very interesting.
Hmm.
I would be willing to read something like that. I have heard, though I can't confirm, that Larry Correa does something like this in Monster Hunter. Uh, but I don't know if that's really true.
If he does, I haven't noticed. Mormon stuff actually kind of reads fairly atheistic to me, because it's like you consider Solomon Kane, right? Even if he's not calling upon God every second or whatever, you can still see that there is a very deliberate Christianity to him. Like you can recognize the flavor of him as Christian. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah,
So,
it definitely does.
right. So, when it comes to things like Mormonism, especially, it just kind of reads like it's atheistic. Partially because there's a sort of you got to take it by your own hands thing that they've got going on because they've had to historically been very self-reliant compared to other people groups, even except for maybe groups like the Puritans and whatnot. Um, it's hold on. So I'm trying to think of how I want to say it. So Mormonism denies Christ's divinity in a very specific way. They do not deny that Christ is divine. They deny that Christ is the Son of God, the only God that there is. They add on many other things that make it kind of like a UFO cult, but is different because it still has a very strong Christian basis. Now it's perverted, but it makes the cult stronger
Mm-hmm.
than it would otherwise be. For example, for some awful reason, I am getting uh, ads, as in YouTube paid ads, for the Falun Gong cult. The Falun Gong is rightfully, I would say, oppressed by China for being a cult. The leader of the Falun Gong is a madman who believes he is the greatest scientist who ever lives. And from the outside, it's absolutely ridiculous. as to why anyone would, um, fall into that crowd, and not just be born into it. Uh, but the thing with the Falun Gong is that it's a Chinese cult around a cult leader. It is very obvious what it is if you have eyes to see, if you have discernment. And most people, by the way, do not have discernment. That's why cults spread, especially those who wish to open themselves up spiritually. I was bouncing just this last night, and I met a guy who said he had spent the day from 9 a.m. until about when I met him, which was 9 p.m., snorting cocaine, drinking, and partying. Uh, and he's like, you got a wide aura. I'm like, thank you. Yeah, let me open your third eye. I, of course, refused to let him open my third eye, and he was offended at me because I was guarded. I did not want to open myself up spiritually to him. That was not a thing I was going to do. This is the sort of person that would easily fall into a cult, and I think he has the energy to be a very good priest of a cult. New age movement nonsense. So, looking at that, yeah, there's a reason why people fall into cults, especially cults like Mormonism. When you have 20 million or however many it is for Falun Gong, which is nothing but a drop in the bucket in China. They're Chinese. That's like 10,000 real people. Uh, you can see a social pressure spread. The reason why Mormonism succeeded is because they had a very hard persecution complex, because they did, and somewhat legitimately were, kicked out of their settled areas and forced to move west into inhospitable territory in Utah. The reason why Utah looks as good as it is because the Mormons worked very hard to make it as good as it is. And you can't fault them for that. They are a part of the American pioneer frontier spirit. But it came with a lot of somewhat violent baggage. Uh, there's a very strong outside them versus us mentality that they have. And I will remind everyone that when I went to Salt Lake City, all the menial tasks were performed by non whites. Now, while I am no man to criticize the past, it has always disturbed me very much that I never saw any officer in a supposedly international movement who was not white. And I want to be very clear, I'm not being a shitlib about this. I'm just saying that they claim an international movement, but it's very clear that Mormons are more like a people group, not a religion. I mean, they're a religion, but it's like the people and the religion are one. Does that make sense, Anthony?
It does. So I've seen a few former Mormons, I should say, get interviewed on places like Pints with Aquinas. I always thought that the way that the reason that Mormonism falls apart to me, uh, it's very hard. This is gonna sound weird, and you're gonna be like, "No, it's very easy." But let me finish my explanation so that it might make more sense to you. It's very hard to actually argue against the historicity of the Book of Mormon. The reason it is very hard to argue against the historicity of the Book of Mormon is that Mormons are very, very good at looking at like the typical. So, how would you explain contradictions in the Bible, right? Like, there are all sorts of ways that you would and you have to, and you like because there are things that would just appear to be contradictions in the Bible unless you read the Bible in a particular way, right? I would argue properly, you would as well, right? If you read the Bible properly, there aren't contradictions, but it's not obvious on first glance to a lot of people.
You
Mormons
do
are very
need some
good,
training to understand the Bible.
sort of. I wouldn't go so far as to say straight up understand, uh, but I would say that if you read two things that appear to be contradictory, this is most obvious in the Gospels, right? Um, and for example, things like dating of the Passover, the resurrection accounts, whatever. You do need to use. proper textual analysis to harmonize it. Otherwise, you're going to conclude and that there are contradictions, right? Well, Mormons know about a lot of these techniques, things that something you would sometimes call telescoping, which is zooming in on a particular event in isolation, like plucking it out of the timeline so that it might not be in the proper spot, right? Zooming in on particular people and events. Mormons, all sorts of techniques like that. Mormons know about all of this. And they will use all of these things in explaining away the Book of Mormon. Why don't we have archaeological evidence of Native American Jews? Well, they probably, if you talk to a Mormon, they will give you 5 different answers, right? All of which sound plausible, and they go, and you could pick any one of them because it's gonna be one of them. We just don't know which, right? Uh, it's very hard to argue. They're very slippery when it comes to arguing the historicity of the Book of Mormon. My issue with Mormonism is that I think that when you actually get down to the philosophy behind it, it ends up being philosophically incoherent, which makes it immediately fail at first principles, right? Like, Mormonism fails before you even get to the Book of Mormon, when you learn what Mormons actually believe. And sometimes it is very hard to get Mormons to admit what they actually believe, but if you drill down enough, you will get there, right? Like, and when you actually get there, it turns into like, okay, wait a minute. So you believe that the Father was created, right? Uh, so you don't worship God. You worship a God, lowercase g, right? But you don't worship the creator of the universe. That's not even a part of your religion. You know, like and Jesus Christ's whole creation, like all of this stuff. There's a lot of their Trinitarian theology. Like, it's a completely different. They're doing something completely different than what Jews and Christians are doing, right? And fundamentally, Mormonism is simply not a continuation of Judaism in any reasonable way. Ancient Judaism, modern Judaism, they were not worshiping a lowercase g God, right? They weren't.
Right.
Now, Mormons will try and argue, at least the more educated ones, the smarter ones, the apologists of the Mormons, they will try and argue that he was just like the king of the gods, right?
Right.
But then you're just kind of kicking the can down the road, and you also need to ask the question of, they didn't seem to realize that, right? Like, maybe early on they didn't understand it, but Jews in the Bible clearly understood their God to be the God above the gods,
Right.
right? Which, again, we've had this conversation. Like, to be clear, the Jews did not invent this
Excuse me.
concept. People, no problem. People think the Jews invented this concept. They did not. They absolutely did not.
Right.
Aristotle acknowledged this. The Romans knew about this. The concept of a god above the other gods was well known in more philosophical circles. The only difference is that the Jews made him their deity. Now, I'm saying made him. Like, obviously, that's not right.
Right.
I
Right.
just
Right.
mean that
Right.
in the Jewish religion, he was their deity, right? And not only that, he was a very active deity. In other religions, he was seen as like there. You could prove he existed. He wasn't active, right? In Judaism, the God above the gods was active in a very, very profound way. Mormonism just isn't that. The
Yeah.
Father is a completely different thing. The Son is a completely different thing. I don't even know what they believe about the Holy Spirit, to be honest with you.
Doesn't
Uh,
exist, I think.
what was
Or
that?
it's I think they have something like Jehovah's Witnesses where the Holy Spirit is indistinguishable from God the Father's will.
I see. Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I
So
think.
so it becomes this weird thing where, like, Mormonism kind of fails at first principles. And a lot of Mormons, like, if you talk to them, they will try very hard to admit, because I remember having, it was actually really interesting. And the Mormon, to his credit, I don't think that he was being dishonest, right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't think he was trying to lie to me or anything. He did pretty manfully stand up to critiques, but it was really fascinating because you had to dig to get him to admit what everybody was saying we know is true. It's like, dude, the reason, like, they were complaining that people were going, why don't you consider Mormons Christian? We also worship Jesus Christ. And it's like, because you don't worship the same type of being, you don't worship God. And he's like, well, yes, we do. It's like, no, do you define God like this? We have to keep repeating, like, this is what God is. Do you worship this over and over
Yep.
until they finally admitted, well, no, right?
Yeah.
Like, it took them a long time. And I think it, like, to break down that barrier of, like, okay, yeah, so we are doing something that's fundamentally different. And I'm like, look, I don't know how to I feel like you're being honest here just by the fact that you're facing up to us, right?
Yep.
Like, and not in an antagonistic way. So I'm just trying to get you to grasp here how what you say you worship and what I say I worship are two fundamentally different things. Like, they're different in kind. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're different in species. They are not of the same category. You know,
Right.
like that. So that's my real problem with Mormonism. Now, I do think that the Book of Mormon is a historical nonsense.
It
uh
is.
I once saw a very sorry, Mormons. I once saw a very interesting argument against the Book of Mormon that I actually thought was really clever because it also works as an argument against the Quran. Basically, Mormons will sometimes argue that the Book of Mormon must be divinely inspired because certain sections of the book have what's called a chiastic structure, if I'm not mistaken, and they claim that Joseph Smith did not have the education to put in that structure naturally, and that sometimes the structure is as long as entire books. So somebody pointed out, I thought this was a really clever argument. They said, okay, the Quran claims literally the exact same thing, like the exact same argument, chiastic structure, as long as whole chapters, right, in the Quran. Since these two books contradict each other and both of them can't be true, I must conclude that this aspect of each book is not a proof that either one is divinely inspired. Uh, which I thought was an extremely clever way to overcome that sort of
Mm.
argumentation. And the problem is that a lot of these apologetics came later, right?
Yeah.
In Islam as well, by the way. Like, they did not think, like, okay, how do we prove that the Book of Mormon is real? No, they had accepted the Book of Mormon as real, and then apologists started working on, well, how do we prove it? Right? It's the same
Yes.
thing with the Quran. Like, the
Yes.
Quran is an entirely the arguments in favor of the Quran are entirely circular. Some more clever apologists in more recent times have tried to get around the circularity of the arguments. The problem is, those arguments that they are making are not like historical arguments for the Quran. Nobody ever really thought of non circular arguments for the Quran before.
Right.
Like, that wasn't a part of Islam. Uh,
Yep.
and it's the same thing with Mormonism. In truth, Mormonism is Islam. Like, it is very much, it is the same religion, just not as violent. Uh,
Oh,
I'll stand by that.
okay.
Fundamentally, it is a corruption of Christianity that removes the Trinity, uh, and is based off of a prophet who may have been a con man or may have seen some sort of religious experience. Uh, and it's unclear which. Now, if you want my personal opinion, I think that Joseph Smith was entirely a con man. Like, I don't
Yes.
actually think he saw any religious experience from my reading on the man.
I agree.
Uh, like, I don't even think it. Like, Muhammad, I'm actually willing to grant might have seen some sort of demon or something. That, and then I think he was also an opportunist. Like, he
Oh
certainly
yeah.
interpreted in the way he wanted to. But like, I'm willing to go. Like, no, I think he might have seen something. I've even seen some people go, and I'm at least willing to hear them out. I've seen some people say, "Oh no, I think he got like a real revelation that he then twisted." Well, maybe, I don't know, right?
No, I wouldn't
I
do
don't think
that.
so, but I'm
Yeah.
willing. I'm willing to entertain the possibility because I think that there are aspects of his story that strike me as like something happened that was supernatural,
Right.
right?
What we
Joseph
would,
Smith does not strike me that way.
yeah. Like there are things that Christians can look out to and say, okay, yeah, I see that. I see how this could be put forward in that way. Um, you know, if he was interacted with a demon, and of course he had no, defenses against it. He would do, what he did. But yeah, Joseph Smith, nobody can see these golden tablets but me, and my best friend who stands also to gain a lot of money from this. Uh, yeah, no, it's a little bit weird. It's a little bit odd. Most of Muhammad's teachings are just him rambling about stuff. It is not, necessarily a thing that he had on his person that only he could see.
Yeah, as Thomas Aquinas put it in Summa Contra Gentiles, which is his book, against the against the Gentile religions, right? Uh, which is one of his two masterpieces with the Summa Theologica. Uh, and he has a section on Islam in Summa Contra Gentiles, if I'm remembering this right. And what he says about Muhammad and Islamic teachings is that, and Aquinas's thing is that he can be very dry, but he's also very direct and to the point. To the point of that's what makes him so dry sometimes. Like he will just like, tell you straight out. And he said he doesn't pull any punches with Islam. He says that the good that is found in Islam is no more than can be discovered by any man of reasonable wisdom. Uh, and the bad is just an obvious corruption of Christianity. Like, so basically, he says there is good in Islam, but the good is not anything that it's not particularly interesting that's there, because anybody who had even a moderate amount of wisdom would be able to figure out the things that Muhammad did about life. You know, there isn't anything in Islam that's particularly like profound, I guess is how he would have put it, right?
Yes.
Uh, but the bad comes from the fact that he corrupted Christianity. He probably corrupted Christianity because in the area that he was in, it is pretty obvious reading the Quran that he believes he doesn't know what the Trinity is. He believes the Trinity has something to do with Jesus, God, and Mary. Like
Right.
this it's pretty clear that he thinks that Christians worship Mary. I once saw a really entertaining debate between a Catholic and a Muslim where the debate was about Mary, and he goes, "All right." So then he goes, "Why is Muhammad?" And goes, "Like he clearly just got this wrong that Mary's in the Trinity." And he goes, "No, no, there were people who worship Mary." And he's
Yep.
like, "We know all of the groups that worship Mary. They're the Coloridians." Well,
Yep.
he goes, "We know that's the group that worship Mary. They were nowhere near Muhammad. They were in a different time. So
Yep.
Muhammad's just wrong." They're
I
like,
think
he's like, he
300
just
years
misinterpreted
difference.
what he saw.
Yeah. Sorry.
And it was pretty funny because the guy right now was like, "No, we know." He's like, "You're acting as if like, oh, it's like there might have been heretics who worship." It's like, "No, we know the heretics that worship Mary. We know exactly who they are. They were not there. Muhammad saw people praying to statues or something and got confused." Uh,
Yeah, I could see that.
and like it's pretty odd. And then he mentions other things too, like he gets names wrong about like he goes. So, for example, Mary's parents in tradition, the tradition is that they're named Joachim and Anne. That's the oldest tradition. It comes from the Proto-Evangelion of games, or at the very least, it's the earliest source we have for it. That doesn't necessarily mean it comes from there. That
Proto
just means it's
Evangelion. Proto
yes.
Evangelion.
You know what I mean though. The the infancy gospel of James is the
Yeah, I
other
know.
translation. Sometimes
It's
you know.
very weird,
Um,
Anthony. It's a very
it
weird
is.
book.
It is a weird book, but that's the earliest source that we have on record for the names of Mary's parents, right?
Yes.
Joachim and Anne.
Yes.
So in the debate, he goes, "Okay, the Quran gives a different name for Mary's parents," and he makes the point. He goes, "Now there is no." He goes, "This is really weird because there's literally nowhere where this name is in any tradition in Christianity that the Quran gets this name. It's like it seems like they're just wrong. So where did he get it from? Well, there is an Old Testament figure named Miriam, and look at that. Her parents' names are the same as the ones that Muhammad gives to Mary. Uh, he's like, it looks as if he confused Mary with this Old Testament figure and then said these are her parents. Because if we were gonna give names to parents, why weren't they Joachim and Anne? That's what
Right.
every Christian at the time would have been calling Mary's parent.
And quite
Um,
frankly, those names are perfectly acceptable uh, Jewish names for Mary's parents. It's like I don't have an argument against it. I just have the argument that we don't have it. You
oh,
know.
yeah, I would agree that the Proto-Evangelion of James needs to be used correctly. It's a source that you could use. Say, here are things that people believed in the early church,
Yep.
right? That is its value as a source,
Yes.
and that is valuable, but it's valuable in a very specific way. So would I say, oh, Mary's parents' names are definitely Joachim and Anne? No, but I would say that we now have a piece of evidence that there were people who identified her parents with the names Joachim and Anne
Right.
sometime in the second century.
I think
Uh,
Joachim is in the Bible, by the way. It's Anne that really is the question.
so Joachim's Anne is in the Bible. Anne is virgin, so it comes from Hannah, and there's an Anna the
No, no,
prophetess in
I
the New
meant
Testament.
in the sense of in Mary's lineage.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. Yeah.
No, no, like they have
Okay.
the names of her father, which is Joachim, if I'm recalling correctly, and I'm not mixing it up with Joseph's lineage.
Well,
But
there's a theory. There are a few theories to harmonize the two genealogies, right? That
yeah,
we get. One of the theories is that I think the Lucan genealogy runs through Mary, so that might be where that comes from.
we agree, I believe that we agree with that. Yeah.
Um, I'm actually, believe it or not, this might surprise you, but I'm actually not entirely convinced that that's the reason. Uh, one of the reason I forget, there was a really compelling explanation I read once. That was like basically that one group needed to prove that he was descended from David, and one group needed to prove that he was descended from some other like major figure to satisfy the two groups. The genealogies emphasize different people in the timeline,
Yeah.
like to add up
Which is
to
normal
like
for Jewish genealogies, anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, don't get me wrong. The genealogy is one of the least problematic quote unquote contradictions to me. Like it
Right.
it literally it's so easily explainable for various reasons. Honestly, you want to know the contradiction, which isn't a contradiction, but the problem of the quote unquote in the New Testament that bothers me the most, it's
The
the Quirinius, the census of Quirinius
oh yeah,
drives me nuts.
because it's like because it makes sense if you think about it and how the Romans acted. Every Roman would put their name to it, and then by the time it reaches the backwater backass of the Roman Empire, that always caused trouble. Well, it's not going to sound like whatever the Romans called it now, would it?
The thing about the census of Quirinius that I have read like many plausible explanations,
Yeah.
and some have been like, okay, yeah, that's probably not it, but this one might be, this one might be. I want to know which one it is. Like, it drives me nuts because it's like, this is clear. This is the one that's most clearly like the historical record outside of Luke just doesn't match it.
yeah.
Right now, the one theory that I actually think is the most plausible, which might surprise you, is that okay, this is where we know that there was a census of Quirinius and that didn't match up with Luke's. Josephus mentions it,
Yeah.
right? So Josephus says there was a census, but the timeline is wrong. My current running theory is that it's Josephus that got the time wrong and Luke was right.
Yes.
Uh,
I mean,
which
Josephus was
is
100 years on, 130 years on.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, Josephus. They mentioned like you need to be careful with this because Josephus is considered mostly reliable,
Yeah.
but he's not 100% reliable.
Yeah.
Uh, and I also want to be clear, this is not the only way to explain it. Like
Right.
there are many different theories. This is my current like the current one that I'm holding on to right now is that Josephus just got the date wrong. Like
Yeah.
Luke was right and Josephus was wrong. That the census that Luke was talking about is the famous one.
Yep.
Like the problem, I think the reason that people get so stumped by this, including me, is that people have in their head that there must be like there are tons of different sources and all of them contradict Luke, right? But that's not
Right.
actually true.
Right.
There aren't tons of different sources that contradict Luke. There's one. Now,
Right.
it's one source that's considered to be mostly, though not entirely, reliable, but nevertheless, it is literally just Luke says one thing and Josephus says another. Which one is right? It's not like we have, documents from the census that contradict Luke. We don't,
Right.
right? We just happen to know, like, okay, there definitely was a census of Quirinius. The problem is the only other source we have puts it at a completely different time. So, how is that true? Well, there are several possibilities, but right now, the one that seems most likely to me is that Josephus just got the date wrong. Like, think about it. If anyone, as you pointed out, if anyone is getting the date wrong, it's gonna be Josephus, because Luke was literally interviewing Mary. Like, this is all but explicit in the gospel. There is a line, Mary kept this in her heart. There
Right.
is no way that Luke could have known that unless he interviewed Mary.
Right.
Like, the fact of the matter is, if one of those two is going to be wrong, it's going to be Josephus. Like,
Right.
Luke is literally talking to people who actually were part of the census, like, who are still alive.
Yep.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that is the one that drives me the most nuts. All of the other supposed contradictions, don't bother me at all. They strike me as like non-issues, like the resurrection accounts, for example. Uh, the resurrection account supposed contradictions have never bothered me because they never struck me as contradictions, just people telling different parts of the story,
Yeah.
right? Like,
And it's like where the guy goes, and I was the one who was there first at the tomb. Yeah, no, I believe that somebody's giving their personal recollection. You know.
right, like that stuff. The crucifixion accounts don't bother me. The For example, the supposed discrepancy in dating between John and the other gospels is actually explained pretty easily by Jewish dating methods.
Yep.
Like, it's really not even a hard it's not a hard fix,
Yeah.
like, and that's my impression with most of the supposed problems, is that it's not only that they're not really contradictions, it's that they don't strike me as like a stretch, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not even a stretch to me. It's like, yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense,
Yep.
right? Like, uh oh, this version of the Sermon on the Mount is slightly different than this version of the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, I don't know. He mentioned the part of it that the other guy didn't mention. Like,
Yeah.
it's it's not that unbelievable. Yeah.
It's like, okay, if you have a problem with that, let's both go to church and let's both talk about what the pastor, what the pastor's sermon was about, and we'll see how it goes.
Exactly. And while we're on the subject, I've read a little bit. I'm pretty traditionalist when it comes to New Testament, like, scholarship and dating. I'm very much not in the, like, oh, actually, we've learned that there are multiple authors, or they're not. No, I believe to be clear, I believe this for pretty solid reasons. I believe in Matthean authorship of Matthew. Like, I believe it was the Apostle Matthew.
Yeah.
Uh, I believe that John the Apostle wrote John. Right. I think
Shocking.
that's what I know. Right. Uh, But more importantly, with all of this, like, I believe in a very early dating for all of them. Basically, I believe that all of them, including John, probably were written before, and certainly the other three. I think almost certainly Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written before the destruction of the temple. And I think John probably was.
Right.
I,
Oh,
I think
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
I'm willing to concede that John might have been written in like the 90s, but honestly, 70s, just before the destruction of the temple, seems more plausible to me.
Yes.
And Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I think, were absolutely written before. There are so many things that just do not make sense if the temple was destroyed when they were writing it. Like, that somebody. Here's the biggest one to me. Like, this is the thing that convinced me. Uh, if it were written, if those gospels were written before the destruction of the temple, then why don't they mention that as a fulfilled prophecy? Like, it was it was his second most famous prophecy to his own resurrection,
Yep.
right? Like, if they wanted to make the point, the fact that he predicted the destruction of the temple and the temple was destroyed would have absolutely been something they would have trumpeted, right? But they
Yep.
don't. Why don't they? Well, because the temple hadn't been destroyed yet when they wrote it. I also don't believe in Q. I don't really to be honest with you, I find the logic behind the whole Q, like,
The
oh,
Q
the
document.
say, yeah, the Q document, I find it really weird. Like, the logic just seems really tortured to me.
Yeah.
Uh, that you would
It's
need a Q.
yeah. I put it under I put it under tricks. You know, like it's not really a thing. It's made a thing because people don't want to believe in God. Like that's it. That's the whole thing. You know, you
I
don't
would
need.
agree with that, but I know, like, it was popular among, like, biblical Christian, I should say, scholars, right? Like,
eh,
Q was kind of a popular theory for a
no one's
while.
respectable.
It
Really.
does. It never casts a sniff test to me because I'm like, but wouldn't the fact that they all have the same sayings also be explained if they all heard the same things? Like, I don't know why we need to say, yeah, here's a super secret gospel of sayings,
Why
right?
not just have the super secret gospel of sayings? Oh no, you know, no, 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 no,
Like,
no.
they were all sharing from that. It's like, what do you mean they were like? Why would they need to share from that if they heard Jesus speak?
Right.
Like, they would have all heard the same things. That makes sense. Also, there's the fact that Mark is definitely a source.
Yeah.
Uh, like Mark, I consider Mark in priority to be almost certain at this point. Like, that's been
Yes.
the scholarly consensus for a very long time. Uh, and the fact that, yeah, just that alone would explain a lot of it. Like, you don't really need a gospel of sayings if you just go, yeah, they got it from Mark, right?
Yep.
Oh, but what about things that Matthew and Luke share that they don't get from Mark? I mean, I don't know, but probably because they were both they both were listening to the same guy. He said the same things.
Right. They were
Like,
there.
yeah, Luke might not have been. Uh,
Yeah.
but Luke was interviewing people who were there.
Yeah. Which is just as good. Like if you're going over what Peter remembered, I'd say that's as trustworthy as him hearing it himself. You know.
Yeah, or close. Like, so Mark is it like Mark's gospel is sometimes even called, like, colloquially. I know there is a gospel of Peter, but it's sometimes called like the gospel of Peter because it's pretty well known that Mark was a disciple of Peter. You see this, like, it's something that's repeated a lot. Uh so it's generally accepted that Mark's source for his gospel was Peter,
Yeah.
right? There's also, of course, the very, very tantalizing moment of the man who was watching Jesus get arrested and they tried to grab him and his loincloth comes off and he runs off. And it's just kind of included and never elaborated on.
Yep.
And I am really, really fond of the theory that this is Mark.
Yep.
Uh, like, why is this there? Like, well, maybe it's Mark. Maybe that's why he included it to be like, yeah, and I witnessed this happen, right? Like,
Right.
I was one of the witnesses. Uh, it also this is just more criticism of me than a commentary on Jewish psychology, but it blew my mind when I was reading Acts of the Apostles like years later, after taking some classes on Bible stuff and realizing that Mark is mentioned in Acts of the Apostles
Yeah. Why? What? Why would it blow your mind?
because I had never realized that before.
Oh. Oh, I get you.
Which is more that this is a commentary on myself. I just like
Yeah.
that's a ridiculous thing for me to miss. But I'm like, wait a minute, his name's John Mark.
Mark?
I'm like, oh crap.
Mark? Yeah.
I'm like, that's the Mark. I know
The
that
Mark.
guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Mark. I mean, probably. We actually don't know that.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah,
Yep. We've moved
we've
on.
gone off topic, but I've kind of said. I mean, I've kind of said what I want to say. Like I said, I don't really have. My problem with sci-fi is that, frankly, I can't really think of a lot of examples of a good portrayal of religion. Probably the quote unquote best of a portrayal of a fictional religion I've seen is Foundation. But when I say that, I mean like for entertainment value more than anything else.
Right.
Like I don't know if you remember, the chapter itself is entertaining. I will give him that, right? Like
Right.
I remember being amused as I read it and going like, this is a pretty funny way of showing things, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's actually holds up under any scrutiny. You know, uh,
No.
it definitely would not. And as far as other portrayals of religion in science fiction, like Canticle for Leibowitz does a great job because it just uses Catholicism, and Catholicism is a real religion. So yeah, it's very
Yeah.
believable. Uh,
Yeah.
right? Like, I know that there's a book, Brad Torgerson, who was one of the Puppies guys from the olden days. Uh,
Yeah.
he wrote a book called Chaplain's War. I bought it years ago. I can't remember if I even finished it, to be honest. I emphasize that this is not a criticism of the book itself. This is just like for whatever reason I got busy and never ended up finishing it. Uh, the book could be great. I just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like he had something like that. Awake in the Nightland is an interesting in the Nightland series, but Awake I think even more so. Like they're interesting in that they are science fiction. They're not portraying a religion, but in a sense they're philosophically religious.
Right.
Uh, right?
Yes.
Like that's the best way I could put it. They are science fiction, but they're not materialist, which is very rare for science fiction.
Yes.
Uh, and they're explicitly not materialist. And yet, the characters themselves have no religion. There is implied to be a god. It's more than implied in The Last of All Sons, but uh, in the other books, there's implied to be some sort of god above it all, right? Who makes the stars
Yes.
uh, shine,
The
and
good
who
power
sometimes,
that. Yeah.
right, sometimes helps people in the Nightland, and it's made explicit as God in the final story. But they don't seem to worship it, right? Like they don't really seem to honor it at all. The most that we get is the main character of Awake in the Nightland seems to, because he is rescued by the good power, seems to want, kind of implies that he's going out of his way to honor its wishes, kind of,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. Like, but that's the closest thing we get to any sort of religious impulse with the good power of the Nightland,
Yeah.
right? And so yeah, it's kind of it's a little strange now that I think about it. I think it worked mostly because I think it works because the Nightland kind of works as allegory in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Uh, if you've ever read the Nightland stories on the original website, what's fascinating to me is that, in my opinion, absolutely none of them capture the vibe of the Nightland but John C. Wright's stories.
Yes.
Like, have you read them?
Yes.
Yeah. John's mentioned this, and I said, in fairness to all of them, like they were not professional writers, and he was, which fair enough. Like, I don't mean to criticize people doing a fan project. Yeah,
Mm.
fanfic, they could do what they want, but like, it does indicate to me that there is something about the stories that John got that other people were missing, right?
Yes.
Like, and it's interesting because Tom Simon has a famous essay on this, or I don't know if it would be famous in our circles. Legosity, if you remember it.
I
Uh,
do not.
so it's a great essay. I recommend it. And Legosity is his essay. It's his term for a world that is created that has building block that is ripe with building blocks for people to play in. Right,
Mm.
basically very good for fan fiction. And he says sometimes a book can have great legosity but not be that good itself, and that would be Awake in the Night, or the
The
Nightland. Sorry,
Nightlands.
not
Yeah.
Awake in the Night. Yeah, the Nightland. The Nightland has incredible legosity. It got a dedicated group of people who started building in it, but it was not good itself. Some books have both, like The Lord of the Rings is an excellent example of this. There are full length fan works written in The Lord of the Rings, like novel length fan works written in the universe of The Lord of the Rings. Yeah. and it could easily take many, many, many more 'cause it's such a well thought out world, right?
Yes.
Uh, but what I'm thinking of now though is I wonder if the Nightland has less legosity than we thought. That perhaps these people did not actually grasp what made it great, and only John C. Wright did, and was able to create more brilliant things in that world. But that is a particular skill of John C. Wright. It's something that it is, if anything, his most particular bit of genius is that he is very, very good at working in the worlds of other creators.
Yes.
But I don't know. I'm musing. And I have nothing
Yeah.
else really to add to the discussion.
No, we're pretty done. I'd said the things I wanted to say. I think that I think that in the future, religion is still going to play a key, and that people who dismiss it as something of the past are, of course, atheistic fools and stuck in the 1970s. I want to thank everyone for joining in. We'll have something more lighthearted next time. Have a good one.
Yeehaw.